Hello, whilst Forest Focus as Nottingham Forest make waves in the transfer market once again this summer with the arrival of Douglas Luiz imminent if it's not already happened when you listen to this. The Brazilian international is well known to Forest fans, as are James McAtee and Amari Hutchinson, but we're less familiar with Arnaud Kalimuendo. So joining me to tell us more about the former Rennes striker and give us his take on all things Forest is journalist Tom Williams, who specialises in English and French football. You might know him from reading his words in The Athletic, heard him on the Toasty Football Show, and he's also on TV as Canal Plus's Premier League expert. Tom, good to have you with us today. How are you?
Happy to be here. Yeah, thanks very much, Matt. The only thing I wanted to flag at this early stage is that I went to hospital this morning and had some eye drops put in, which has given me terrifyingly large pupils. So I just thought I'd clarify nice and early that is a medical matter and not because I'm on some kind of, mad bender.
Well, I have had one guest come on before, and I won't name them, but I had a text saying, "Did that guy do a line of coke or something before he came on?" So
there you go. Just gonna nip those accusations, nip those rumors in the bud, nice and early on.
You do have, I should say, for people who are listening, not watching, and if you are watching, you can see it. Tom's got a fantastic background behind him. You're not. That's your room, is it? You're not in a library or anything.
No, this is my house, and it looks like I'm showing off about the number of books I own, and I genuinely I'm not. I'm sitting at my kitchen table, and it is the only spot in my flat where I can plug directly into the internet. And if I don't do that, the Wi-Fi is not reliable enough for you to be able to see and hear me clearly. So although it looks like I am trying to pass myself off as some kind of, great intellectual, honestly, like this is the only, I guess I could have a different backdrop, but these circumstances have been kind of forced upon me somewhat.
Yeah, I see. You do.
Thanks nonetheless.
Well, you do what politicians do with about 6 British flags behind you. So no, it's good. It's good.
It could be worse. It could be worse.
Right. Let's talk more about Kalimuendo then. I've got a few specific questions on him, but tell us in general what you've made of him as a player at Rennes. What was your verdict on him?
Yeah, I mean, he's followed a quite linear progression over the course of his career. Came through the youth system at Paris Saint-Germain, and as we know, there is generally quite a lot of competition for places at PSG, and particularly in forward areas. And I think something that stood out about Kalimuendo early on was his eagerness to get playing time. He wasn't happy to sit on the bench and rub shoulders with, Mbappe and Neymar and Messi. He wanted to get out there and get a taste of first-team football. He had a couple of loan spells at Lens in successive seasons, and then left PSG to join Rennes in 2022. And since then, he's followed this quite linear line of progression. 7 goals in his first season, 15 in all competitions in his second, and then 18 in all competitions last season, which, as it's turned out, was his last in a Rennes shirt. So, there's been a kind of coherence to the way that he's gone about his career. And in terms of his playing style, he's a kind of, shoulder of the last man striker. His main attributes are his pace, his movement, his sharpness. He's reasonably good technically. He's got quite good feet. Decent with his back to goal as well. He's not a big guy. I think he's 5'9", so quite short by the standards of modern strikers. But like low center of gravity, quite sturdy. Uses his body well, and invariably does most of his best work running in behind onto balls played in behind, working the channels. I think his penalty box movement is generally good. He's someone who, attacks the near post well, gets across his man well. He has played wide. He played wide for a little bit on the right towards the end of last season under Habib Bey. Don't think he enjoyed it a huge amount, but he's got the pace to play there. So yeah, that's the kind of package that I think Forest are getting.
So one of the things I was wondering, I want to ask you about is when you look at 3 strikers that have moved this summer, him, Ekitike, and Benjamin Sesko, I think they're all the same age. They've got very similar goal records last season. I think it was 13 and 15 with similar amount of assists as well. There's huge difference in the prices, like 96, 70, and then 26 or whatever it was. What is the reason, do you think, for that disparity between the prices? Are they just better all-round players? Is that the thing?
Yeah, I think that's probably partly it. I think there are a few factors. I think one of those factors is that goals in the Bundesliga are valued more highly than goals in Liga. And obviously, Sesko and Ekitike have both come straight from, Bundesliga clubs who were competing for Champions League qualification last season, as opposed to Kalimuendo, who's coming from a Rennes team who had a pretty underwhelming campaign and finished in mid-table. You look at the individual profiles of the players as well. I mean, Sesko has been earmarked as like a future superstar since his teens. A huge amount of noise about him pretty much right from the start when he came through at Red Bull Salzburg, and then he's been at Leipzig the last few years. One of the biggest German clubs in terms of recent success and Champions League qualification and things like that. Ekitike, similarly, he had one season at Haas and was kind of heralded as a phenomenon. Basically, gets his first big move, goes to PSG, and it doesn't work out, but then bounces back at Eintracht Frankfurt and scores a lot of goals there. Kalimuendo has never had that kind of hype around him. He was seen as a promising striker coming through at PSG. He went out on loan. He scored a decent number of goals, but not a spectacular number of goals. So I think that probably explains why there is such a discrepancy in terms of the fees when you compare him to Sesko and Ekitike. And also, he's not yet a senior France international. He has been capped at under 21 level. I know that Ekitike is not a senior France international yet either. But yeah, that's probably an element of it as well.
I suppose one of the things we've been good at then is getting players just as they're breaking out or look like they're going to break out. I mean, Murillo's probably the best example, but all the lads from Brazil, Jair Cunha and Igor Jesus as well. Do you see that ceiling in Kalimuendo when we're discussing Ekitike and Sesko have obviously got it? Do you think Kalimuendo's got that about him, or is he maybe a level below?
I think in the right circumstances, he could be a 20-goal-a-season striker. And there aren't too many 20-goal-a-season strikers around in Europe. I guess the question mark at Forest is going to be how much playing time he's going to get. Chris Wood is obviously still first choice number 9 and reminded us all against Brentford why that is the case. So I guess Kalimuendo is going to have to adapt to a supporting role. The fact that Forest are in Europe this season means that the minutes are going to be shared around. So I would have thought he's going to get starts. He is going to get minutes. But that will be something new for him. Both at Lens and at Rennes, he's generally been an automatic first choice pick, and that will probably not be the case at Forest. I think if he gets upwards of 10 goals this season, 10, 15 goals, that will be a good season for him. I think for him to be hitting, bigger numbers than that and coming closer to fulfilling his potential, he needs to be a regular starter somewhere. But maybe this move will be the thing that, that allows him to show that he's worthy of that kind of opportunity. And I think you look at the way that Forest tend to play, and as a counter-attacking team, on paper, Kalimuendo almost makes more sense as a centre forward in this team than Chris Wood does, because for all Chris Wood's attributes, pace is very obviously not one of them, where it's one of Kalimuendo's real calling cards. So, I can see him coming on late in games and having an impact. But yes, I'd be surprised if he was sort of keeping Wood out of the team within a few weeks or months and scoring goals at the kind of rate that made him undroppable. This is the next step in his development, and it probably will require a little bit of time for him to find his feet. And then, I guess we'll see what he's capable of.
Just lastly on Kalimuendo, you touched on it around the positions there. I mean, sometimes when players come into the league and, they can do a job on the wing. They get pushed out there for a year to settle in, and then they move into the central role. Do you think that wouldn't actually suit him then? He is just a striker, and only play him on the wing if you were struggling or desperate.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's always been a striker. You know, you do come across footballers who've kind of moved around a little bit, and you know, a lot of young footballers who pride themselves on their versatility. That's not Kalimuendo's case. He has always been a centre forward. You know, he wants to be the guy in the penalty area. He wants to be the guy running onto through balls. He did spend a bit of time on the wing in the second half of last season. Did all right. I mean, he's got the pace, he's got the footwork to do it. You know, he can beat a man. He uses the ball reasonably well. He's pretty two-footed. You know, favours his right, but you know, he's capable of scoring, crossing, passing with his left. But he would want to be playing through the centre. And to be honest, I think that, you know, the wide options that Forest have got mean that, you know, he's probably going to be all right in terms of not being asked to fill in on the wings. You know, obviously, unless there are injuries that force Nuno Espirito Santo's hand. But yeah, I think he'd like to see himself as someone who is a centre forward and can play on the wing if you ask him, but would rather not.
Yeah, you mentioned the wide options there. There are two other players, French players, who were linked with Forest strongly. One of them's a winger in Dilane Bakwa. The other one's Soungoutou Magassa, a holding midfielder. I'll ask you one on each of them, just in case we reignite that interest. Bakwa's a player that we were really excited about. Are you seeing him as a Premier League level talent, you know, this summer or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be the logical sort of next step for him. I mean, he's still young. You know, as a fan of French football, I'd be quite happy to see him stay at Strasbourg for another season because he was brilliant last season, and you know, he's a really fun player to watch. A very modern, left-footed, right-sided attacking player. Great dribbler, huge confidence. You know, seems to really enjoy his football. Loves a nutmeg. Loves a sidestep. Loves a kind of showy brush of the ball with the studs of his foot. And yeah, had a pretty productive season last season. He got 9 assists in Liga, which I think was only 2 fewer than Ryan Shaki, who was the kind of the top assist provider in the league. Pretty versatile as well. I mean, one of the things that Liam Rossigna has brought to the club since he became coach last summer is real sort of tactical versatility. So Bakwa, I mean, I think his best position is as a right winger, but he's played, you know, as a right wing back, as a right-sided midfielder. He's played in you know, sort of more central areas. So he's got lots of different strings to his bow. I think he will inevitably end up in the Premier League or at, you know, a comparable level. And yeah, I think if and when he does turn up in the Premier League, I think he's someone who people will really enjoy watching.
Yeah, Strasbourg are really interesting. I saw their average age was like 22 at the weekend. I really hope they do well, apart from the fact they're in this Chelsea Blue Co thing, and it's a bit depressing. If you saw that tweet about Enciso last night.
Yeah, I mean, and like, they are an absolutely fascinating test case because there are an awful lot of things about Strasbourg and the whole Blue Co thing that are like fundamentally unlikable. And you know, Strasbourg fans, many of them have been up in arms about it from the start. You know, there were protests against the ownership model throughout last season. You know, they're kind of shackled to Chelsea. They have kind of become this feeder club for Chelsea. But at the same time, it's working really well for them because it's enabled them to put together this squad of exceptionally talented young footballers. And, you know, had they not lost their last 2 games of the season last season, they would have been in the Champions League, which would have been a remarkable achievement. So on the one hand, you kind of find yourself, you know, sort of hoping that it doesn't work out because it is this very kind of, you know, cynical example of how modern football runs. But then you look at the kind of football they play, the kind of players they've got, and you find yourself thinking, well, you know, sort of fair play.
It would have been funny if they made the Champions League because of Chelsea. And I'm like, this is just me thinking of an article I read, and it might be wrong, but Chelsea didn't do the blind trust thing, I think, and then maybe they'd have missed out. So yeah, they got very fortunate there, certainly. Just one other quick Strasbourg one. There's a lad who listens to the podcast, WT Analysis on Twitter. People know about him. He's really switched on. Moreira at Chelsea, I think, is the cousin of Eric da Silva Moreira, and he's really touting him as someone we should sign. Is he any good? Is Diego Moreira?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Bakwa, plays on the opposite flank, and also, I mean, super versatile. I mean, he is a winger by trade, spent most of last season playing as a wing back, but can play anywhere. Incredible work rate, great engine, gets up and down, scores goals, makes goals, and was one of the key players. I mean, I think when you looked at Strasbourg over the course of the season, the standout players, I mean, there were quite a few actually, but Bakwa would be one, Moreira would be one, Emmanuel Omega, the Dutch centre forward, would be another one, Andre Santos, Brazilian midfielder, who was loaned to Strasbourg by Chelsea. He had a great season as well. There were sort of top performers everywhere, but no, I mean, Diego Moreira is another one who looks destined for big things.
What about Magassa? He sounds fantastic on paper, but as usual, these players I've never seen him play. Is he one that Forest should have really gone for or not?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about Kalimuendo and how linear his career progression has been. Magassa's progression hasn't been quite as smooth. I mean, he hasn't ever succeeded in becoming a first-team regular at Monaco. I think he only made 12 starts in Ligue 1 last season. Another versatile player who's perhaps become a victim of his versatility in that he is a defensive midfielder by trade and a very accomplished one. Quite a languid style, but a tall, rangy player, defends on the front foot, reads the game well, more of an interceptor than a tackler, uses the ball pretty well. But he has filled in at centre-back quite a lot in recent seasons. Not so much last season, but the season before 2023-24, he filled in at centre-back quite a lot and wasn't really playing much in midfield. Occasionally filled in at left-back as well, despite not being left-footed. So he's been bumped around a little bit. Last season, invariably played as a holding midfielder, but didn't really get that much of a look in that Monaco's preferred defensive midfield pairing was Denis Zakaria, their captain, Swiss international, and Lamine Camara, really talented young Senegalese midfielder. Paul Pogba's obviously arrived at Monaco as well now, and will move ahead of Magassa in the pecking order. So it feels like if he is going to get regular game time, he could probably do with a move. And I think he could probably do with a move to a club who are going to allow him to play as a holding midfielder on a regular basis. Because I guess the danger for young players is when you do get kind of moved around a lot in the early years of your career. Sometimes scouts and recruiters can kind of lose sight of what exactly it is that you do. So yeah, I mean, I don't think Forest look particularly short on paper in the areas of the pitch where Magassa operates. But he has got the kind of profile that is susceptible to be of interest to clubs of Forest stature.
Cool. Just before I ask Tom a bit more on Forest in general and how he's feeling about how they're shaping up, quick word for Trent Navigation. Sunday's game, 2:00 kickoff. It's open from 10 a.m. for breakfast. So if you don't have a ticket, you don't want to watch it at home, but you do want to watch the game on TV, check it out on the outdoor screens, or you can get inside the pub, get your Sunday roast there. Get your meal there at night as well, pizza or barbecue. Make a day of it. And thanks very much for their support as ever. I listened to Totally Football Show season preview part 2 the other day. You were on it, Tim Spears and Dan Story of This Parish. And I think one of the questions was, who's the next Forest? And I think Dan said Brighton and no one said Forest. And I don't know if you weighed in on it. So what are your thoughts on Forest this season with the benefit of one extra game of hindsight that those lads didn't have?
Yeah, I mean, it felt like the mood music around Forest pre-season wasn't sort of super optimistic, and the message seemed to be, well, last season was a bit of a one-off, perfect storm, very difficult to replicate that this season. I was surprised by quite how negative Nuno was in his last press conference of the season. I mean, he went, I think, even further than he perhaps needed to go, in terms of dampening down expectations. And then, a couple of days later, you've played Brentford off the park. Chris Wood's back in the goals. There are more and more players coming in. And I mean, I see no reason why Forest can't have comparable success this season. When you have qualified for Europe, when you've been in the Champions League places for the majority of the previous season, and you've succeeded in strengthening your squad, you haven't really lost any key players apart from Anthony Elanga, who has, been replaced by a player in Dan and Doy who looks on paper like a more than adequate replacement. I don't see why, Forest shouldn't be aiming for a similar level of success this time around. I mean, yes, there's the challenge of juggling the Europa League. And, that is something that clubs that aren't used to qualifying for Europe do occasionally struggle with. But then I guess, part of the reason why Forest have been so active in the transfer window in the last week in particular has been to try and add a bit of depth to the squad. You look at the key men from last season, holding on to Morgan Gibbs-White was obviously massive. Milenkovic and Murillo made such a big impression last season and are still there. So yeah, I think if I was a Forest fan, I'd be feeling really, reasonably optimistic. Last season was so weird because if you'd offered Forest fans, your final position before the start of the season, I suspect they would have, most of them would have snapped your hand off. But then having been so close to a Champions League place for so long, there was that slight feeling of underachievement. But yeah, I mean, I think that maybe it was helpful that you were playing a Brentford team who a lot of people are expecting to struggle this season at home in your first fixture. But I think it served as a reminder of what a well-coached team Forest are and how well all the players in the team know their roles. And yeah, I mean, I think there's no reason why Forest can't go on and have another very successful campaign.
Do you think part of their final league position is going to be dictated, obviously, almost exclusively by what they do, but also what clubs like Spurs and Man United, what they're able to get to this season, and also the final few days of the window with Newcastle and that Isak mess, and to an extent Aston Villa as well. Just those, how they shake out is going to influence things, because Spurs and United, I mean, they can't be that bad again, can they?
I mean, you'd think not, but I guess we'll see. But I think I made this point on the pod, or perhaps I didn't. But I think there are similarities this season between what happened the season after Leicester won the league. Sorry to be mentioning Leicester on a Nottingham Forest podcast, but that was a real perfect storm in that. Leicester exploited the fact that an awful lot of the big clubs were having kind of transitional seasons, and the big clubs all reacted that summer by strengthening very significantly. And what we saw the following season was a kind of return to not the natural order, but a return to the kind of order that we'd seen in previous seasons. The big clubs have all spent huge amounts of money pretty much this season. So you would expect that they will get back towards where you would expect them to be. They've all strengthened. They all look, stronger on paper. And the clubs liable to, pay the price for that are clubs like Forest, clubs like Brighton, Bournemouth, who managed to have successful seasons last season. But then, Forest and those other clubs have the advantage of going into this season with a degree of continuity being in place. These players all know, how Nuno wants them to play. They've enjoyed success together last season. Yes, you've signed a lot of new players, but, I don't think too many of those players are going to be walking straight into the starting 11. So, I guess, that it will come down to whether the advantages that Forest have of having this group of players who played together for a little while and who've enjoyed success together last season, whether that will be enough to keep them ahead of the likes of Manchester United and Tottenham and all the other big clubs who've invested in new players, or whether those big money signings will enable those big clubs to just kind of get their noses back in front again.
Where do you think we stand in relation to the clubs that we probably see ourselves looking to finish top of the mini league with Brighton, Bournemouth, Brentford? I'll throw in there, Everton, West Ham, Wolves, Fulham. I might be missing one. Do you see us as top of that pile, or maybe Brighton because they don't have Europe? How do those other clubs shape up in relation to us, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm expecting Brighton to have a good season. So I'd pick Brighton out from that group of clubs. But yeah, I'd have Forest right up there at the top. Even before you get into what's happened this summer, what Forest showed last season, the durability, the ability to beat big clubs, the home form, the kind of the sense of identity in their football, the very strong playing identity. There's an awful lot of Premier League clubs you kind of think, what is it they're actually, what's the idea here? Whereas Forest, it is much clearer, and I quite like the fact that you've got a club like Forest, or you've got a team like Forest who play with such a clear counter-attacking identity. I think it brings a variety to the league that is very helpful. And I think that would have stood Forest in good stead even without all the players you've added. Holding on to Morgan Gibbs-White would have been important regardless of the noise around him potentially leaving. But the fact that I think Forest fans had got to a point of thinking, this might be it, only for him to then be persuaded to stay, will overlook the slightly weird announcement video with Marinakis, standing next to him. And that's obviously had a positive impact in terms of morale. So yeah, I guess, we talk a lot, and certainly last season, about the middle class in the Premier League, and I'd certainly include Forest among the leading clubs in that group of clubs.
Just lastly, then, before we let Tom go, you talked about the new players coming in. Douglas Luiz hasn't signed yet, but I'm sure he will sign on loan. He's probably the only one that might walk straight into the 11. He might well expect to. I'm sure Ibrahim Sengari will have something to say about that. What do you make of the signing after a rough year at Juventus? Do you see any red flags, or is it all good all the way with him?
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit, I didn't really follow, how he was getting on at Juventus all that closely, so I'm not entirely sure why he wasn't getting in the team. But if you judge him on what he did at Aston Villa, he looks like a great signing. I mean, he was a key figure in that Villa team, sitting at the base of midfield, great distribution, great mentality, set pieces as well. And yeah, again, on paper would look like the perfect foil for a player like Elliot Anderson, who obviously likes to get forward a little bit more. And Douglas Luiz, I guess, is a rare example of a modern number 6 who still possesses a goal threat because of his set piece prowess and his long distance shooting. He's proved that he can do it in the Premier League. He's obviously going to be super motivated after that disappointing season at Juve. So yeah, I think the fact that he'd be joining on loan, removes some of the risk for Forest in that, if it doesn't work out, nothing ventured, nothing gained. But yeah, I think it would look like a fairly smart piece of business.
Lovely stuff. Thanks to Tom. If you've enjoyed this, do us a favor, hit like, hit subscribe, do consider membership. You'll get early access to this interview and most other things that are pre-recorded, and that's the same with Patreon. Links in the description for both, or just give us a lovely 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. Back tomorrow with the Palace opposition preview with Matt from a team called Palace, and then post-match show on Sunday. Tom, thank you very much. Where can people find more of your work if they want to check it out?
Thanks, Matt. So I am at Tom W Football on various social media platforms. I have a presence on Twitter, but I've kind of stopped using Twitter, because it's obviously an absolutely horrendous hellhole these days. But I am on Blue Sky. I'm on Instagram, and yeah, you'll probably find me relatively easily if you go looking for my content, as we have to describe our output as journalists these days.
We do. God, I used to rail against all this stuff, content and Twitter when it first started. I remember listening to, God, this was years ago, Chris Moyles on the Radio 1 breakfast show talking about Twitter, and I was thinking, what a load of crap. I'm never going to get into that.
Never catch on. Stupid name. No.
Yeah,
can't see it catching on. Yeah,
I know, and now I'm on it through work all the time because I have to be. So there you go. Right, thanks very much to Tom. Appreciate that. Like I say, we'll be back tomorrow. Do check out Tom's work elsewhere. Totally Football Show, The Athletic, and all of that. If we don't see you tomorrow, then we shall see you soon.